Dreams Along the Little Bighorn is made possible in part by a grant from the Herbert I. and Elsa B. Michael Foundation.
Proud soldiers atop horses, they rode into the Little Bighorn Valley. Indian warriors swirled about them. Their frenzy kissed death again and again. The terrible sounds of war echoed over the earth. If you listen, you might still hear them. A litany of names to dance forever with glory and infamy. Crazy Horse, Gall, Two Moons, Reno, Benteen, Custer, and the others. A silent roll call on this lonely prairie. The bullets have been long silent here, the arrows not heard cutting through the air, and the ugly ferocity that once lashed through the buffalo grass and over the gullies has been quiet for more than 110 years. It happened so very long ago. But for most everyone, it still seems like yesterday. It won't go away. Perhaps because great dreams of great people are never lost. The Battle of the Little Bighorn was militarily insignificant because the fate of the Indian had already been decided. But it contemptuously and continuously trespasses from the past into the present. A distant tragedy still relevant today, a grim reminder of the appalling face of war. The meaning of this battle remains important as heroes are recalled by both sides, and while myths are dressed to suit changing generations. A sad salute to a proud people, a dramatic statement on the human condition. The spiritual strength of the Indian gave him victory here in 1876, but has the spiritual way of life hurt the Indian in a modern world? Like so many heroes of mythic proportion, has their greatest virtue become the cause of their downfall? All of this quietly drifts along the riverbanks, dusting the prairie, clinging to our conscience, whispering to our future.
Those Indians down in the valley there were certainly defending the way of life that they had known for centuries. And they were doing only what their people wanted them to do, and that was to preserve that way of life. And they fought here on a hot June Sunday in 1876 to defend that way of life. Custer represented another culture who out here to defend their way of life and to expand that culture. And they clashed here on a hot Sunday. It was, I think, most fitting this battle can be called a clash of cultures, because that's certainly what it was.
Born in the state of Virginia, Civil War territory, historian Neil Mangum knows well the life of George Armstrong Custer, and he knows the public opinion on the controversial soldier has changed back and forth over the years, a pendulum of belief. Mangum says he strives for balance and perspective when he talks of the Custer enigma.
He was brutally ambitious, but not to the point that anything he can link to presidential aspirations. He was brutally ambitious as far as his career was going. He certainly vied and competed with the other officers of his rank for affection and recognition with the superiors above him. And this got him into trouble with some of those officers as well, too. They considered him to be a show-off, which he was, and an egotistical individual. Custer was a very brave, very courageous individual, and he was not afraid of anybody or anything. Sometimes it might be better to have a little cautiousness in an individual, but as far as Custer, if you were going to fight for the pure sake of fighting, I'd rather be beside him, because that man would lead you. You could say that about Custer, he was an adolescent who never grew up. He was a little boy who just never at 36, he was still a little boy at heart. And you look at his writings, he would write home to his wife that he had been out on the Yellowstone expedition, for instance, in '73, and they had gotten lost. And he'd write home to his wife, Dear Durrell, D-U-R-L, sometimes how he wrote to his wife, and he would brag about how he had got the command, look what your boy's done today. I shot 14 elk, 6 grizzly bears, and I had the longest shot. And it's all throughout Custer's life. He was a little boy that never grew up.
Of course, Custer was the military hero people thought of when the West was being tamed. He was the legend in the making. And the soldiers, the enlisted men, those who followed orders, they too were living an adventure, but it was not painted with glory. Author and historian Don Rickey frequently guides educators to the Custer battlefield and surrounding Reno-Benteen battle sites, telling of the soldier's story. Rickey, perhaps more than anyone, understands the mind of the soldier of 1876 and that era when Indians were the enemy.
Well, the regular army of that time, of course, is entirely volunteer, and most of the enlisted men were in it due to what had started out as economic necessity. The regular army was not made up of wide-eyed idealists who are enlisted for some sort of ideal reason, such as saving the Union, as had been the case with some of the Civil War types. These people were professional soldiers, and professional soldiers do what their officers and commanders order them to do. So there was none of that sort of questioning in the mind, what am I doing here? And there's always that sprinkling of particularly younger people who just thought that they liked the romantic idea of the Army life. Most such people found that their notions of romantic activities in the West pretty rapidly evaporated out here, but by that time it's too late. You were already contracted to serve for 5 years.
The soldiers of the 7th Cavalry were about 24 or 25 years of age, many foreign-born. A physical profile would show they averaged around 5 feet 7 inches tall, weighed about 145 pounds. The desertion rate was very high. Life out west, very hard.
Well, their pay was, for a private, was $13 a month. Of course, you're getting everything else but. It's furnished, but that's, you got your housing, clothing, but clothing was figured on an allowance. So much per year were you allowed to spend on clothing. And if you were careful, you could save money on it by using old clothes or buying a deserter's clothing and such what. Now, there were a lot of civilian jobs that only paid, maybe the most unskilled kind of labor in some of the eastern cities. It only paid $2 or $3 a week. So $13 a month is not all that bad. It sounds very low by our standards, that's all.
The newspapers of the day served its American readers a regular dispatch of progress out west. Remember, America had found a distant romance with the untamed, rugged, and wide-open spaces. So when the campaign of 1876 was underway, freelance newspaper man Mark Kellogg was there, covering the newsmaker, Custer, and looking for that one big story.
Kellogg had the opportunity to go with General Terry, but chose to stay with Custer. He recognized that Custer was the newsmaker, and that any news that would be to be covered out here would likely focus on Custer. So he stayed with Custer, and as a result, paid for that decision with his life by dying here on this battlefield.
Sandy Barnard, an associate professor of journalism at Indiana State University, is writing a book about this frontier reporter who came so close to one of the biggest stories ever in American history.
He was an adventurer, as I mentioned before, who saw that the frontier needed to be covered. He came out here for 2 reasons. One, to make money. He was a reporter. The second reason was to pass the information back to Bismarck, and that way the information could be passed on to New York, to the New York Herald. He worked for the Bismarck Tribune, and his reports were passed on to the New York Herald by his editor, Clement Lounsbury. But I think he saw his role as that, as a reporter, a man who goes out to gather the facts and present them to his readers.
What do you think it meant, Sandy, to the people who read the columns of Mark Kellogg and other accounts of what went on in the West when they lived in the East and they knew nothing really about the frontier? That was their only vehicle.
through him, they had eyes to the frontier. There was no other way of knowing about the frontier except through the newspapers of the day, or through books and pamphlets that might be written about life out here. But the newspapers tended to be the only objective source of information. Magazines oftentimes in those days were more lurid and perhaps more fantasy than truth. So I think they depended greatly on the newspaper of the day to find out what was life like out wherever it was, out here on the frontier, especially in Kellogg's case.
One of the many ironies out here from the battle, of course, is that there was a reporter here covering one of the biggest stories ever.
I feel sorry for Mark Kellogg. I've researched his life for several years now, and I think I've got a good feeling for him. And he was successful in life to some extent. He never became famous. If you want to measure success, he was a failure. By that way, he was a failure. But at the moment that could have brought him perhaps his greatest fame, he lost it. He never got the chance to write his story from here. And I know from reading his other 50 or 52 columns of his Frontier, he certainly would have responded to the occasion and have covered this battle, if he had survived, in a way that would have been very illuminating for the readers back east. As you know, his reports were filed with the New York Herald from the Bismarck Tribune as well. Unfortunately, of course, he died, and that moment of glory for him just wasn't there. And there's irony in all that. He also, in one of his first columns from Bismarck, he refers to having cruised the countryside. He went east, he went north, he went south. We didn't go west, because that was Sioux country, and he didn't want to seek any game in the happy hunting grounds. And unfortunately for him, that's the way he died, in the happy hunting grounds out here.
In his final known dispatch, Kellogg wrote a phrase commonly used back then: "I go with Custer and will be at the death." Ironically, it would end up being a foreboding passage of his own death. His big story thus never filed, his dream unfulfilled. Reporter Mark Kellogg became a footnote in history, his pen and ink silenced, along with the 7th Cavalry he set out to cover.
What they wanted was freedom, to be what they were when they was first planted here in this country, which they call the United States. They wanted to roam freely, wherever they wanted to go. That's what, according to my grandfathers.
Austin Two Moons, recalling words spoken by his great-grandfather, Chief Two Moons, a great Cheyenne warrior who led a gallant and powerful force of Indians on June 25, 1876, part of the overwhelming victory that belonged to the Indian on that day.
They traveled all over here in the United States. They even went up into Canada, Old Mexico. Nobody didn't have to tell them where to live. Nobody never told them to have a reservation. But now that we have our reservations, which the government has put the Indian here on reservation, and at the battle, after they overrun General Custer, they felt bad that they were on peace, just like what I said about Sand Creek Massacre of Chief Black Cattle's Band, where they violated the treaty that were given to the Indian Cheyenne people. The Black Cattle's camp, they had their white flag, which they were told by the government that any place where they were camping, they're supposed to have a white flag. And that was supposed to represent peace for my people, the Cheyennes. So this is what hurts me, to have the treaties been broken, and to have the people been slaughtered. I feel bad.
So when they did rally, the battle was on, I tell you, they were fighting with that war cry ringing in their hearts. I guess this is a good day to die. And boy, they were just ferocious, I guess. So poor Custer didn't have a chance.
Joe Medicine Crow recalling the Battle of the Greasy Grass, as the Indians called it. His grandfather, Medicine Crow, fought with the white man and against Sitting Bull and the other Indians. And his other grandfather, White Man Runs Him, was one of Custer's scouts. The Crow Indians' decision to side with the white man left a deep division between them and other Indians. The bitterness still simmers today. But as Crow tells it, all Indian people knew what was at stake, what they were fighting for.
Sioux bands had already been placed on reservations in the Dakotas, Minnesota. And Sitting Bull and his band, the Hunkapapas, were still out here, still resisting. He said that I would rather die on the battlefield and become a dog for the white men on reservations. So he resisted. Well, he knew this thing was coming, so he sent out word to all the bands to send warriors to the Little Bighorn in come June, when the leaves are green, for the last big fight. So these emissaries going out to the various tribes would say, come to the Little Bighorn for the last big fight. That was kind of a byword at the time. When the battle actually took place, the war cry was, this is a good day to die.
It was indeed a battle fought with determination, a fight for a way of life, the Indians' final shining victory. In the summer of 1984, and again in 1985, an unprecedented and controversial archaeology team peeled back more than 100 years of time to look at that hot, tainted, and bloody hour on this Montana grassland. Thousands of artifacts were found. New theories emerged on how the battle occurred, and some old myths were rejected. But the evidence uncovered also showed that the battle along the Little Bighorn was a torrential venting of anger and rage.
The human remains that were recovered were the parts that were missed during the 1881 reburial: fingers, toes, ribs, occasionally an arm or leg, and in some cases a fairly complete human skeleton. Just large parts of the skeleton were missed. We found evidence of the trauma that they suffered at or about the time of death, from gunshot wounds, arrow wounds. But at or about the time of death, many of the men were mutilated in some way by the Indians. And it has to be taken in perspective that the Indians, the Sioux and Cheyenne, who did this mutilation, did it in their own cultural venue or perspective, that was the way they did things. They marked their vanquished foe so that individual would not enjoy the spirit world. They hacked at the legs, cut off a head, cut slash marks in the arms and in the chest. And it was an emotional sort of thing for them. It was a clear way of marking this foe, vanquished foe, so that when they went to the spirit world, they could never enjoy the fruits of the spirit world in quite the same way as a person who went there in a whole body, so to speak. But we have to put it in the perspective of the Indians' view of the world, their religion, essentially. That it was a very emotional sort of thing to them to do a mutilation. It was all very symbolic in the process.
You interviewed the Indians on this site.
Yes, many a time did I have them here, and we'd wander over the various places and see where this man fell and where that one fell. It is a place that had so much meaning for these Indians that they were full of information about it to tell me. They could remember with remarkable clarity this event and that. You see, it was their day of greatest victory, the high point of their entire lifetime as warriors, as fighting people. And so it was important for them to be able to come back and see it again and remember what had happened so many years before.
As a young boy, David Humphreys Miller left his Ohio home with his parents' consent and headed for Montana and the Dakotas, determined to find the truth of the Custer battle. Years later, he would become the best of friends with the Indian. He was adopted by numerous tribes and took a vow to tell the truth about the battle. Miller located Indian survivors, 72 in all, who had actually taken part in the fighting. He painted them, learned their languages, and recorded the Indian side of the story like never before. One of the Indian survivors Miller interviewed and painted was Joseph White Cow Bull, an Oglala Sioux from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. Miller found it difficult to imagine this old man was once a strong warrior fighting for a way of life. But it was so, and Miller today believes White Cow Bull was the Indian who mortally wounded Custer. How old was White Cow Bull when you came down here with him?
He was in his 80s. He was quite old, with long white braids, and had to use a cane to walk. He was a little feeble, but he could get around enough to show me this place.
And the year was?
About 1938 was when I came here with him.
Tell me what you recall of him saying when he saw this Minneconjou Ford. What did his expression look like? What did he say?
He was quite surprised. And Indians, when surprised, cover their mouths. And he'd say, ho, ho, wee, meaning that he was very much surprised to see it again and pleased, because this had been part of his principal action. Of course, he then splashed across the ford when other Indians came forward to attack these fleeing soldiers. And so he joined in the rest of the battle.
Was he quiet? Did he think? Was he thoughtful?
Yes, he was for a while. He was pensive and thinking back, recalling.
Using sign language, as he often did with the Indians, Miller told of White Cow Bull's story of killing the man who wore buckskin clothing.
He said, I came to a little knoll, a little mound, with 3 Cheyenne, and we fired back at these soldiers that were coming. And he said that's when this buckskin man aimed his rifle at me, and I fired, and he couldn't see me very well behind this little knoll. I was hidden. Then I was able to fire back, and that's when this buckskin man fell off his horse. It all makes sense because he was dressed as Custer was that day, and the buckskin man was riding a horse that fitted the description of Custer's horse Vic. He was a blaze-faced sorrel with 4 white stockings.
The trust and friendship Miller established with the Indian survivors is apparent in his books, Custer's Fall and Ghost Dance. His expertise on the West and the Indians is evidenced by his work on more than 25 Western movies as both Indian and military technical advisor. Tell me about their feelings, their expressions to you about the past and that great victory, and what they hoped would be left once they were gone.
They hoped that I, a mere teenager, would take down their words just as they said them and present them as the truth of the matter to the white man. They wanted the truth, the true story, to come out and last.
The Indian side of the story will last, thanks to the dreams of a young boy from Ohio. His paintings of the 72 survivors are now a haunting gallery, echoing forever the vision of once proud Indian nations. At a reunion in 1947 with 3 of the last survivors, Miller made an incredible recording of these aged warriors who had taken part in the battle: Black Elk, Iron Hawk, and High Eagle. They sang the same scalp dance song as they had back in 1876 after Custer and the 7th Cavalry were annihilated. People from around the world come to Custer Battlefield National Monument anxious to hear about the battle. And when it's an Indian, like Mardell Plainfeather, telling the story of what happened, the storytelling often becomes a fascinating lesson in history.
Today, for the white people, it's just a curiosity, I believe. Not very many of them look upon it as something significant to their culture. They've won many battles. It doesn't really matter to them historically. They associate it with cowboys and Indians and something where Custer got killed. Custer is a main curiosity, and this is where he got killed, so it attracts them. The mystery of it all attracts a lot of people also. But to the Indian, it doesn't mean very much. Over on the Ogallala Sioux Reservation, and probably some of the other Sioux reservations, I don't know who is all involved in it, but they have declared it a national holiday. June 25th is a national holiday, but they don't come here. They observe it in their homes and on their own reservations in South Dakota. This area where their ancestors won a great battle is not named after them. It's not named after Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, or any of their other leaders. It's named after the loser, Custer. I love educating visitors because of all these misconceptions. We've only talked about a few of them, but they come here thinking that Indians still live in teepees and that we still are nomadic and that we're very primitive. But I like to educate them about the real reasons behind this battle, about our problems and our efforts and our struggles today. We still are struggling to remain a people. We're still struggling to have our culture survive. And these are some of the things I like to tell them about. And so many of them are so receptive to me. The white people that I meet here are not against me, they're for me, and I like that. Many of them have Jewish backgrounds, Swedish, German, and they have a culture of their own, and they understand me. I like that. So when I tell them about my culture, instead of making them believe what they see on the TV screen, they hear it from a real live Indian, you know, that we are still very much Indian today, but we still have to struggle and try to compete with the white man's culture and their society, doing things their way, and then back home trying to do things our way and still try to practice our culture, our ceremonies, our traditions. They really receive me very well because they have had struggles too, and they understand me. We become brothers and sisters in a fashion, in spirit, because let's face it, no culture has had an easy time of it.
Mardell Plainfeather has seen countless visitors at Custer Battlefield, but there are 2 in particular she will never forget. Late one summer night several years ago, she saw what she calls spirits from the battlefield on a bluff above the Little Bighorn River. 2 Indian warriors on horseback, silhouetted against a glinting summer sky. They were silent, she says, but one of them lifted up as if to get a better look at her. She could make out a bow and a quiver of arrows. They carried shields. One of them had braids, the other long, flowing hair. It was an eerie feeling, but somehow she knew they meant no harm. Just restless spirits, she says, roaming over the battlefield, where so much terrible killing took place a long time ago, still lingering.
Well, the first 20, 25 years following reservation life, things were tough. People not used to sitting around, living in huts, and lack of buffalo meat. They lost their health, getting weaker, I suppose. Whereas prior to that time, they were robust people, always on a chase of buffalo. They were healthy, they had a lot of food here. They were healthy people. But immediately when they were settled on reservations, told to live in tents and shacks and so forth, why, they're not used to living that way, and their homes soon would become unsanitary, you know. And then the diseases, new diseases started coming in, and they were dying off fast. And I would say by 1915, we were down from about 10,000 back in 1840s to about 1,000 or 1,200 by 1915. We were just beaten. Then, of course, food was scarce, no longer any buffaloes here. We were supposed to start farming, and you couldn't teach a nomad roving Indian to become a farmer overnight. So the government had a hard time getting these people to settle down any one place and farm. So economically, they were in bad shape too. They were to be detribalized overnight, made from a red man into a white man just like that. That could not be done. So they had quite a time with the deterioration of their native ways, their native culture. And when that happens, I tell you, it is demoralizing. When you tell an individual to quit singing, quit dancing, quit speaking in his own language, you're just telling him to quit living, die. You're no longer a human being, you're just a machine. So they were terribly demoralized. What's the use of trying to live? There's no point in it. But somehow they persisted, I think. I think they would go hide in the woods and do their dances, ceremonials.
These are the men's traditional, ladies and gentlemen. Look upon them because they remind you of what those warriors may have looked like. Those men who fought, those men who gave their lives, those men who gave their comfort so that you and I can have a home, so that you and I can have a way of life that we are so proud of. This is the exemplification of the heritage of the American Indian warrior.
And so it lives on, each summer along the Little Bighorn River, a celebration of Indian greatness among a multitude of Indian nations.
Being Indian, I'm proud to be an Indian because I can be Indian, I can be, understand both cultures, I can go and enjoy the white man's culture and then turn right around and dance and talk and whatever I can do in Indian, and I enjoy myself both. And there's a lot of things that we can do in the Indian that you don't. We can tell stories, and it sounds real funny in Indian. Then you turn right around and tell it in English, and it loses its humor or whatever you want to call it. So I enjoy being Indian, and then I work in the white man world and rub elbows with them all this time, and I just got through 30 years of federal service. I'm through. Now I can just sit around and powwow until I get too old, and then I can go powwow in that big powwow in the sky.
With the rest of the country over the years, an endless stream of consciousness about a battle lost. America had made such commanding technological strides, it was smartly embroidering 100 years of history and waiting for the curtain to rise out west on the next 100 years. But instead, this jolting battle along the Little Bighorn River revealed a dark side of the American West.
In 1876, the Little Bighorn, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, caught the country completely by surprise. We were in the midst of celebrating the 100th anniversary of the country, and in fact, the great Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia had opened just a month before Custer and his men were wiped out. And there we were congratulating ourselves on the great technological society we had become, and the giant coreless engine, which later inspired Henry Adams to write his essay, The Dynamo and the Virgin, was a sensation. And one reporter, in fact, wrote, "Here we have Prometheus unbound, as if we had stolen fire from the gods. Americans were great. America was the future." And then came the news of Custer and his regiment of cavalry being wiped out on the plains by a horde of savages. It just didn't make sense, and it electrified the country. It immediately became a part of our folklore and a part of our myth in its telling and retelling. That's the kind of impact it had at the time. It also was a sign of, it was a sacrifice that the United States was making in its westward movement, and as such became a part of our folklore. It matched other folkloric last stands, for example, the Jews at Masada and the Spartans at Thermopylae. And perhaps even more, the Custer event, the event itself and the myth that it became a part of, provide a counterpoint to the myth of success, the winning of the West, a counterpoint that makes the actual success in the West become plainer and more apparent and more heroic, because through their sacrifice, it made what was actually accomplished seem more tangible and more hard-won. I think that that's the essential meaning of it at the time, and actually that's been the meaning of it, I think, for the most part, till today.
To Hollywood, the meaning of what happened at Little Bighorn was something producers and directors would decide among themselves. The depictions they made, of course, helped influence America's opinion of how the West was finally won. But their movies also mirrored the changing attitude of the country. The movie ticket, a sort of mood ring of the times. Each movie flickering forth images, moral judgments, and miniature lessons in history to an American audience trained on the silver screen.
Custer's a particularly good character to look at changing images within film on, because it seems with every decade his image has changed, and changed rather dramatically over time, much more so than other historical characters. The early films, the silent films that were made about Custer, were consistently favorable. Custer was portrayed as a martyr to the expansion of American democracy into the West. The Indians range from being treated as elements of the environment, another hostile storm, just like the weather would blow through, or a rattlesnake or a wolf. Everything would be an obstacle to the whites, or being treated as truly evil, or perhaps simply being patronized. And this is an image of Custer that runs clearly up through the 1920s, when the 50th anniversary of the last stand occurred in 1926. This image held on in film long after it had faded out in literature. Early novels in the 20s, as a result of the debunkers of the teens and 20s, already were beginning to portray Custer as a character of evil, a vain, ambitious man who sacrificed his regiment in a headlong pursuit of glory, or as an Indian hater, although that image became much more prevalent later.
Hutton says in the 1950s and 60s, Hollywood showed a different Custer, and movies began showing Indians as heroes. And in more recent years, Custer was portrayed as evil, a glory hunter, and a racist.
And so, as children have grown up, as new generations have grown up, these are the images in not only film, of course, but also in novels that they are exposed to. And so they grow up consistently thinking that Custer is a crazed idiot, usually a buffoonish character, not even not even a decent soldier who might be foolhardy, but somehow slightly off his rock. And so the kids I get in my survey classes now, my Western history classes, are all amazed if I say even anything remotely positive about Custer. So inculcated are they with this image.
Artists and authors as well have continually touched up and rubbed the Custer image. At last count, Hutton's research tabulated around 1,500 paintings of the battle and more than 40 films that featured Custer or The Last Stand, all expressions of America's desire to embrace this clash of cultures, and it continues today.
Like I say, the battle itself was insignificant. What was so important was what happened afterwards, because things were never the same for the American Indian as we know it. I look back at their culture, and they had a culture second to none. We could have learned so much, and we learned so little, But a lot of people blame Custer as an arrogant, egotistical, man looking for a political favor, this type of thing. And I think he first was a soldier. He did what he had to do. The Indians themselves, it was their land, it was their home. They did what they had to do. And it's so cut and dried, really. And yet it isn't so cut and dried. It isn't black and white. So many things happened afterwards. And that's why that painting to me was important. I had to paint the painting because it wasn't a tribute to him, it was a tribute to everyone. Because it all had meaning. It had meaning.
To know the greatness of century-old Indian warriors is to understand Indians today. It's not unlike anyone doing their genealogy or tracing their roots. And though it's been well over 100 years since the pinnacle of Indian power was displayed along the Little Bighorn, more and more Indians are looking back for that power, for that spiritual force they once had. They're looking for it here at the Rocky Boy Indian Reservation, one of 7 reservations in Montana. Example, really, of Indian life in America today. Indian reservations today seem like cracked open time capsules containing treasures of the past, seemingly untouched land from a long ago Wild West, and shining tradition. But the reservation is also host to what seems like a culture out of place, leaving Indians often trapped in a confusing void. Widespread poverty, high unemployment, and numerous social problems are regular fixtures with many Indian families. Have they lost their soul? Have they been absorbed into the underbelly of the white world, losing their own identity? Possibly, but not totally. Even here on the reservation, Indians who leave and dismiss their heritage find strength in coming back. And away from the reservation, amid a white world, there are strong signs of Indian spiritualism.
The Creator's creation is what we call earth energy. The earth gives water, food, clothing, and shelter. It is a great thing that's happening now. The rain we call, it is coming down right now. The life is coming down according to our theology. The river back of me, Missouri River, it is life. The water is life for all the species of the world, including us humans. And we are very grateful that the Creator has created this life for us, the great Mother Earth it is, and we shall always preserve it.
Robert Gopher's heritage is closely tied to Chief Rocky Boy, the man responsible many years ago for creating the Rocky Boy Reservation. But Gopher has a dream that reaches beyond any reservation boundary. He hopes to create an alcohol and drug-free, violence-free Native American institution. Gopher says this institution would be established on 100 to 200 acres of land to teach the Native American ways, their theology, and to pass it on to other Indians and the world.
Other dreams I have with my fellow Indian abroad is to get back to their traditions, their teachings, so they can help with the world to promote peace, to create a better understanding amongst groups of people of various backgrounds. So I'd like to see more Indian people to practice a way of life as we do.
Even though there is no formal building or center for teaching, the International Powwow Society, headed by Gopher, moves forward with its message. Symbolic and meaningful sweat lodges like this one, alongside a hilltop of Indian poverty, serve the purpose: nourishment for the soul. And as always, simple respect for Mother Earth, a staple for the Indian. The trees, the water, and the land. A table of spiritual energy, yesterday and today.
I believe the chemicals, whatever that's being discharged in this earth, is giving us those effects. Today, that our bodies are not supposed to be weak like the way they are, but there is a sickness. We do have crisis. We must agree. So together, we can achieve this goal to preserve the clean water, the clean soil, clean air for our future people. Let's love each other, and we can achieve this goal. I believe that we can achieve this goal from working from all segments of every angle. Water is must. Food is must. The soil is must to be clean for future generations. That you look back in the days of Custer. How did you find this land? It was unpolluted. Everything was clean. And this is what we've done for our brothers from Europe. We love you.
The Indian spirit also lives on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in southeastern Montana, where Indians struggle to survive and to maintain their Indian culture. Austin Two Moons believes in the strength of the Indian. The same war power his great-grandfather, Chief Two Moons, poured over this Montana prairie, he believes can be translated into power for peace. It helped him in his struggles with alcohol and poverty, his lack of formal education, and his despair. World peace is Austin Two Moons' dream. He's dedicated his life to it. On the 110th anniversary of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, Austin Two Moons held his sacred vigil for world peace atop a ridge near Last Stand Hill. Two Moons blessed an assortment of people who had traveled to this once bloody battleground. They prayed together. The American Indian International Peace Day was devoted to peace. After hours of blessing and ceremony, an exhausted descendant of a chief who killed on these same hills spoke of peace.
We have to get our minds, our hearts together as one human here on earth. This is why I'm doing this ceremony here at the battlefield this morning. I don't want anything to happen again here in the United States to have a war.
Out of nowhere, it seems, a retired postal worker showed up with a gesture of friendship, returning this ceremonial peace pipe that once belonged to Chief Two Moons' son.
Well, I've had this peace pipe that's been in my family, I don't know how many years, but I've come into possession of it for 18 years since my father passed away, and I don't know where he got it. But there was an affidavit that came with it verifying the authenticity of this. It doesn't do me any good, really. It has been for the last 18 years in the Montana room of the Carnegie Public Library in Miles City, but the last time that I saw it, it was shoved back in a corner, and it just wasn't being appreciated. And so I decided that I better bring it back where it rightfully belonged, and that's to the Northern Cheyenne people.
The 110th anniversary would also be the time to rebury the remains of nearly 36 of Custer's soldiers archaeologists had uncovered in 1984 and 1985. The reburial serving as a sad reminder that war's glory tarnishes with time. And looking back, no matter how far, brings the cold reality into view once more.
We of the Indian nations look on this battle as one of our finest hours. Let me say in the same breath that if we take from that event only the history that occurred here, we do err. If, on the other hand, we as Indian people accept from the events that occurred here the unconquerable spirit of our forefathers, and if we seek to emulate their virtues, such as determination, adherence to traditional values, and the desire to overcome the victory that was ours at Little Bighorn, and we as Indian people can, by applying these same virtues to our modern day circumstance, fashion together ourselves for our families and for those of the Indian people who are to follow after us a better day and a brighter future.
Today we remember the 110th anniversary of the Battle of Little Bighorn. It was on this date, approximately this time, and in this place, that battle was fought. In one sense, we turn to look back over a century ago, to examine anew the clash of cultures that led to the people who met here on this field. Thus, we ask God's help to look back upon our history and to look forward in hope to what we can do together. May their deaths not have been in vain, but increase in all of us the desire and the will to work for justice and peace. For this, we ask your help. In this, we rededicate ourselves to this holy task. Amen.
To be what I am now is through the Creator's gift here on this earth. And the dream that I had was the thing that what I'm doing now is to pray for world peace, is to pray to the Creator to save the thing that what He has given us people to live here. He's maker of all things. And He is still the ruler. And I don't like to have the Creator punish people. If they ever have this nuclear war, that's going to be one of the greatest tragedies that we're ever going to have here in this world.
The mystery surrounding the Battle of the Little Bighorn will likely always be here. It lingers as a sort of haunting leftover of war. But the meaning of the battle seems to rest with all of us, each person taking something of his own from this silent, lonely, and tragic setting in southeastern Montana. But there is hope these days, hope that one day all people will accept the battle, leaving the blood and bitterness behind. It's another dream along the Little Bighorn.
Dreams Along the Little Bighorn is made possible in part by a grant from the Herbert I. and Elsa B. Michael Foundation.